Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we'll be talking about how to paint horses in A Song of Ice and Fire, the board game, tabletop game, miniatures game, whatever you want to call it. So, when I first, began to approach them, I realized, how am I going to make this effective? Because the other stuff is quite quite a bit different. The trouble about the horses is that they have quite a large area to paint. You think about how large the other characters are. The largest thing they would have is maybe like a cloak on their back, and it's not too difficult to imagine how to highlight and shade things. But when it came to the horses, there was such a large area, and you want to have enough contrast, you want to have enough um, saturation, but you don't want to, you want to make it look natural. That's basically the gist of it. You want to make it look natural. So starting off, this is how I'm get my wet palette ready. So I have the foam is wet, and then there's a little bit of extra water on the bottom sloshing around. You don't want to make it a swimming pool because it kind of messes with how thick the paints will stay. But then you just brush out the paper, and I'm just using parchment paper. And then I, just put down my different colors: white, black, brown, yellow, red, that sort of thing. Just the basic things I would be using for the model. And this was extremely helpful because you could keep the different tones you're going to use. So I would have my medium tone, which you just brush over a couple times, and then the dark and the light tone. But it allows you to have that color, and you can just say, oh, I'll make a little fix here, make an adjustment there, and you don't have to remix the paint if it dries out on a regular palette. So that's why the wet palette was really, really helpful. And I just wanted to say quickly, I was a bit cautious about getting one, but it's really worth it. I got a jumbo sized one. It is pretty big, so maybe it'd be smarter to get a smaller size one, because really you don't need that much space. And it's just kind of, what are you going to use it for, sort of thing. But really get some kind of wet palette, make your own, or get one online. They're pretty you can find good quality stuff for not too expensive. So I started off by just thinly coating the horse. You can see this is quite a bit thin, what I'm starting off with, but that consistently allows the base coat to be very smooth. You don't have to go as thin as me, but I really wanted to keep it as smooth as possible as I worked. And it really depends on how smooth you want it to be versus how much time, since it took me a good few layers, 4 or 5, maybe even more, to make sure it was completely opaque. But if you don't want to do that, you could go for maybe 1 to 3 or something like that, and it'll still kind of turn out similarly. Anyway, then when I was finished with that, I just glazed a highlight, and I did that by adjusting the base color that I used. And what I used was a yellow, which I'd mixed with a little brown. And so I could just use that basic yellow, and then maybe with a little bit of white later on. And that way I could highlight it without kind of messing with the saturation too much. Because if I had just gone with pure yellow from the start, then I'd be adding more white, and the white would desaturate the yellow, because you can't have as much yellow when there's white being mixed in, the yada yada yada. Anyway, so that was highlighted by glazing it multiple times. And you accomplish this by having a thin coat of paint, about as thin as where you saw me starting off with that base coat, and then you just pull it towards the highlight area. So that would be the top of the rump of the horse, or on the spine, on the neck, that sort of thing. So wherever the highlight is going to be, you're going to pull the highlight towards. You're going to start from your medium tone and then bring it to the light. Then when it came to the shading, it was the opposite, where you kept that same consistently, but you brought it from that mid-tone and took it down to where the darker tone would be. And I accomplished this by just mixing more brown and maybe a little black as well. And so basically you can mix a good amount of that base tone. I would mix quite a lot, because you cannot underestimate how much paint it actually takes to coat something properly. But that allows you to go back in, mix in yellow, kind of cut a piece off, mix in a bit of yellow, mix in a bit of brown, and on the other side of it, so that way you have your base coat and your highlight and shadow tones with it. And so when you're happy with how light and dark it is, you can go back with that mid-tone and smooth out the area that you that might be a little rough, because you might get harsh lines where you start the highlight and the shadow, and when you bring your brush down, you can get a sharp line where the shadow area is and where the highlight area is. And so to kind of erase that, you have the mid-tone with that same very like that glaze consistency I was talking about, where it's very thin and it would take quite a few coats to actually make opaque, and that makes it very easy to kind of blend it in, because they're kind of offshoots of that original base tone, so it won't look unnatural to blend. It makes it easier to blend it in. It looks natural, and also that was the original color underneath, so it's kind of helping you bring it all back together again. So that's a really nice and easy way of just smoothing it all over. And so when you have that on the major sections, we're going to do an additional shadow, and we can accomplish that by taking quite a bit of a darker brown. I would mix a good amount of black into this, and you can see how dark I go. It doesn't have to be a very thick consistency, but probably a good deal thicker than the glaze tone. And what you're going to do is kind of block in that area where there are major creases. So let's say there's a muscle here, and then the muscles kind of branch off, and so there's kind of a border where the or like a crease where that muscle is. That's where you want to paint it in. And what you can do then is go back with your highlight and kind of shadow tones like I was talking about earlier, because they're still fresh on the wet palette, and you can clean those up after the creases dry. But what this does is it creates quite a bit of contrast from your highlight tone and your shadow tone, and that makes it much more pleasing to the eye. But also it really helps define the muscles if you're close up or a good distance away. So not only are you getting the shape of the sculpt much better, but you're also getting that contrast that we're always talking about. You want your darks and your lights to be as far apart as possible. You don't have to go to pure white and pure black all the time, but it's really helpful to see that contrast, because it's much more interesting. It's basically the opposite of having that children's toy, just whatever tone of color, just flat. That looks really, really unattractive, versus having a nice transition of colors from very dark to very light. And so you can achieve that by getting those darker tones in. So after you've cleaned that all up, then it's going to be time to start working on the other parts of the model. And um, one thing you shouldn't forget is the hair of the horse. There's, of course, the tail and then the mane on the neck. So what I did was I tried to choose a color that would kind of work with the coat. You should do some research. So what you can do is you find like a pattern you like of horsehide, and then you would you just look up pictures of horses. And so what you can do then is say, oh, I like that the color of its hide. What's the hair color? And so then you can go on to just match that hair color, and it's really a brown or a black or reddish, whatever the color is. And then what you would do is you would just get your base coat down, and then you would just highlight with just thick streaks catching the upper section. So don't place your highlights randomly, but I would do 2 layers of highlight where you just mix in white with whatever the base color was, and then I would just catch those hairs. And so what I would do is, so let's say this is the tail, so these are the kind of strands of texture standing out. I would highlight all of those with that first highlight, and then mix in even more white, and then blend in just where the where it's like at the very top, where it's the most exposed. Like same thing with the mane. If this is the neck and then this is the hair, you would do it on the texture, and then you would do it on the very highlights where it's kind of like at the peak where the light would reflect off. And you can just look up pictures of horse mane and manes and things like that, and that could give you some idea. But if you go a little too far with the highlights, you can always take a wash. I use Army Painter Strong Tone for that, and you just go over it. Maybe use wipe off your brush and then kind of clean the highlight, clean the wash off the highlight, so that way it still is bright, but you still get that kind of blending that always happens when you apply a wash to something, and you also get the kind of dilution of that highlight. And so it really depends on how far you want to go. That's case to case thing. You have to do that yourself. I can't tell you. I can't show you. There's also the horse's eyes. So kind of similar to humans, I would take a off-white tone. There's pure white, so you could mix in a little bit of yellow or a little bit of brown just to tint it. Don't make it like a light brown. You want to make it an off-white. So you'll have to kind of judge that, but definitely not pure white. Definitely not too far off of that though. So you would take that off-white color and just fill in that section for the eye, and then you could just take a dark brown or a black and then kind of dot it in. You can be a little more detailed because of how large the eyes are. What you can do is when you make that circle of the pupil, you can go back with that off-white tone and just highlight a very small section of it. So you would have like a black circle here, and then you would maybe make a smaller circle like maybe here, and so you just kind of dot that white in there just to show like a highlight coming off the eye or something. So that's how you could do the eyes of your horse. Now it comes to the rider and the leather straps all across the horse, and I've shown that in previous videos, and the upcoming video will be about painting the Starks. So you could just look to those if you're interested in the colors you can pick. You can kind of mix things up a bit because they are horsemen. They're not standard infantry, but you go with the standard stark colors of that pale, slightly bluish gray tone, and do like kind of a rough metallic kind of look. And then of course you just choose your favorite house star colors and browns and leathers and that sort of thing. And then of course, don't forget to paint the face and all the little bits of skin that might be showing. And so you can see here, the face is painted in such a way that it really brings out the highlights, and I was really happy, so I just wanted to show this one off. Essentially what I did was I took my deeper face color, Bugman's Glow, with maybe a bit of Cadian Flesh Tone. It's basically like a standard flesh tone that's you could just mix a little red in, and it becomes kind of like a reddish angry tone. And then you would put in your a few highlights on the cheeks because those were more exposed. And then for the mustache, I did kind of like a dark gray, and then I just build it up to white, just by kind of dolloping smaller and smaller sections on. And you don't have to blend it very well just because of how small that area is on the model. But if you just give it a lot of contrast, then it'll really look good. And that's kind of the name of the game here. So that's about it. As you can see, the horses are all based up like you should. Make sure you base your miniatures. Don't just call it quits when you finish the paint job. But I hope you like what I did. I experimented with a few different colors. I would say the red was kind of my least favorite horse. I don't think you should go that red, but there are horses of all colors. If you look into it, they have all kinds of patterns. And maybe if there's some more horses, I could go into that as well, where we do different patterns with light spots and dark spots and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variation that can be done, but I hope you learned something from this, and I certainly did painting this unit. It's definitely very interesting, and I'm excited to paint more horses. So till then, see you next time.